We have another exciting guest on today's show. Dan Szymborski is joining us to talk about ZiPs. I don't mean the Akron University mascot. I mean the baseball projection system. I had to. I had to make the connection. We will get into so many fun things, including, I already told him I'm going to mention this, the comp section that has comparison section that is for fun, but does talk about George Valera and Aaron Judge on today's Locked On Guardians.
You are Locked On Guardians, your daily podcast on the Cleveland Guardians, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. I want to thank you for making Locked On Guardians your first listen today and every day, wherever it is you get podcasts. We have a special guest on the show, and I don't know, for me personally, this is a fun one, as I've had many minor interactions with via Twitter, our guest over the years. Everything from one time getting a Steam code for a free game that he was giving away to, I believe Jungle Gyms was a place we had multiple discussions about in the Cincinnati area. I think I have that right. But on top of all that, what he's most known for is the ZiPs projection system, which, Just and I both have friends in the game, around the game, through our years of writing. And, this is one of the projection systems. It's one of the ones that people really look out for and pay attention to. And like I said, on top of coming up with the system, and I don't want to misexplain it, so I'm going to kind of cut myself off there, but just always been a very nice, kind, and fun interaction on Twitter. So I would highly recommend, and if I was better at this, if you're not following Daniel and you're listening to this podcast, I don't know what you're doing. You're not doing this right, but I'm trying to make sure that I get his screen name correct, at DSZM Borski. So go follow him right now. But Dan, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. See, you mentioned Jungle Gyms, so now I'm thinking of a wide aisles of cheese and beer and all sorts of the hot sauce fire truck that
I have not been there yet.
Oh, you have to go there.
My wife's family's in Dayton, so I keep meaning to go. I think the next trip I'm going to take the car and go check it out.
Go. Maybe you can get them as a sponsor, because we're talking a lot about them, and I could sit here and wax philosophic about them.
I've heard about you through them like multiple times, and I'm like, I gotta go. So next time, I think I'm like, that's the plan. Nothing else in Dayton. Just going to make sure I finally make it there after many years.
I've also had good interactions on Twitter with Dan, but also in person. When you were in Cleveland for the All-Star festivities in 2019 at the, I don't even know, I can't remember where it was. It was some sort of speakeasy. Like I'm the Clevelander here, and I don't even know where we were, but it was you and Eric and Kylie and Meg and I think Jake Schusterman.
Were you involved in a conversation where we were talking about riverboat gambling at the end?
I probably was. I at that point of the night,
it was, or the casino or something. I had a lot of dark and stormies at that point, or darks and stormies. I'm not sure what the plural of that is, but Dave did pay for our bar, so I was drinking them all night, and people were giving me dark and stormies all night, and so I was pretty plastered. I skipped breakfast the next day because I was pretty sick the next day, and I'm rarely sick when I drink, but I had like 15, which is a little too many in a 3-hour period for me. I had a little trouble getting my Uber because the guy wanted to know where I was, and I'm like, I'm just a drunk man standing, looking dazed in the street, and he found me.
I had too much at that point too. The conversation could have gone any number of ways at that point, but I wanted to ask if you had enjoyed your stay up here that week.
Oh, it was fun. I would have liked to have stayed longer. Especially because I spent about a day of it kind of sick. But I mean that's what happens. You know what Hedberg says, if you don't worry about what happens later, because the beginning and the middle was terrific. And it was. We had a lot of fun. The game was fun. The the panel was a lot of fun. It's always fun being around people who like Fangraphs and are interested in our work. No, that was a lot of fun. I missed panels because we didn't have them for a couple years because of COVID. So I'm hoping to be able that we can do more of these types of activities again.
Let's see. I would follow Dan on Twitter even if it wasn't for baseball, because I enjoy Dan's posting of cats, which I know we're probably going to talk about at some point, but also the horrendous like 80s, 70s cookbook pictures of random recipes, and he believes that beans don't belong in chili.
Yeah. Beans do not belong in chili.
Yes.
See, you're really going to get me off here because beans. I mean, chili is meat and chili peppers and like some seasoning and like a little bit of corn flour, a little bit of masa harina, and that's it. That is the pureness of chili.
I will follow anybody that agrees with me that Skyline's awful. So that works for me. I know it's an unpopular opinion, but I will follow anybody who says Skyline is terrible.
Yeah, see, your side. I'm near Cincinnati. I'm between Dayton and Cincinnati, a little closer to Dayton and Cincinnati. Your side of the state is better because it's the farthest away from the chili.
I know it's going to get you in trouble in your hometown.
That's okay. They're still mad at me that I kind of didn't vote for Jonathan India first last year for the Rookie of the Year, and I denied him the unanimous award as the Cincinnati Baseball Writers Association member.
Oops.
I just enjoy the fact like Justin was really excited yesterday to tell me about how he planned to talk to you about like chili. Like this was something even more so, I think, than discussing the ZiPs projection or any of the players or baseball in general. He was like, I'm going to talk to him about beans and chili.
See, I talk about baseball. I talk about a ton of baseball, but I don't just talk about baseball. And unlike, other writers, I'm not berating them about like politics and stuff. I'm staying out of that stuff. I just have my little corner of weirdness, chili and cats and video game references and bad Gen X jokes and neural network photos and text.
I was gonna say all of your like mock-up pictures have been great of late. Those I'm not entirely sure because again I'm not always the best with knowing things, but like I just see you when you start putting together these like the ones you've been doing of like all sorts of different things. I am so awesome with descriptors today, but like, was it somebody as like a lion was one of the ones today?
Yeah, because they had that lion die, and I saw someone's tweet about how Los Angeles had just lost Justin Turner and the lion, so I just made a mountain lion version of Justin Turner, which was cringy because that's the best part about the photo the art AIs or the text AIs is not that they're perfect, because if they were perfect, they'd be boring. It's that they're not perfect that makes them fun. That makes them look ridiculous. So I'm kind of fascinated by that stuff, which is not surprising. I'm someone who, a large part of my writing uses algorithms that I develop, so I'm highly interested in that kind of thing. It's all kind of in the same field as predictive modeling. It's just predicting text instead of baseball projections, and it's probably more useful to project text and photographs and artwork than the very niche product of baseball projections. But that is where I found myself professionally.
No, like I said, I know we haven't even gotten into the baseball of it yet, as we did at the end of segment one.
I did segue us into accidentally.
I know. But I guess this is like our way of saying that we are fans of the whole enchilada of things you do, and we appreciate having you on. We're gonna take our first break here, and then we will talk baseball. I promise you, we'll talk baseball. You want some baseball? If you're listening, as we started recording, I think it's as we're recording, Brandon Drury just signed with the Angels, so that's one less person that Guardians fans have been asking us about. But there's a chance that my Twitter is just like massively delayed because we all know what Twitter has been like of late. But first, let's take a quick sponsor break here, and I got to put up our handy dandy little thing to talk about our good friends over at BetOnline. As I like to say, a Rushmore sponsor on this very show, one of those who've been with us almost every single day, it feels like, for the past 2 to 3 years. They're your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there. From pro football, the college bowl season, to basketball, and maybe not the World Cup, but I'm sure they did have that at betonline.net. If you love sports podcasts, you can find those there as well. They're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting info. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. Remember to go and check them out for all those things that you need. I like to use them as one of my many places to look at what gambling odds are, not even for gambling, but just for projection of how things are going to go. And now I promise we'll talk about baseball, and there is our first cat interruption as well. Perfect timing, as that cat will now sit on my secondary screen and ruin everything I've been trying to produce there. So,
I crossed off my bingo card, so we're good.
You crossed off, yeah. So now I just got to interrupt you and cough into the mic, and we're halfway there. So the Guardian ZiPs came out, and let's just start there. Many of our fans get mad when we don't explain things well enough, or when I make the assumption that people know what like WAR is, or like what batting average is. I mean, maybe not batting average, but it feels like it sometimes. How would you like elevator pitch explain ZiPs to maybe someone who isn't familiar?
I don't think you could really elevator pitch it because it's kind of gotten a big massive thing that has grown incredibly. I guess my too long didn't read version is it's a computer projection system. It has no personal input from me, so it represents none of my opinion other than, of course, the opinions of what I researched to build the set of algorithms. Similar to kind of like how hurricanes are projected, meteorological forecasting. ZiPs basically establishes a baseline for a player. It does it through stats from recent years, characteristics of the player, a lot of adjustments for the StatCast type of data that is available out there. It compares players to a large cohort of similar players. So when you see a comp for X player, it's comparing that baseline for that X player against every other baseline for every other player in the database. So if you're projecting Jose Ramirez, it starts with his baseline, and it assembles a big cohort of guys who have similar baselines at similar portions of their career. For hitters, it's about 170,000 baselines. For pitchers, about 140,000 different baselines of just player and year. And then it uses kind of the cohort, very large group of players that have roughly similar characteristics, and it charts out the future based on what was observed in the past. Because realistically, all we know about baseball is what's happened in baseball. There's no experimental evidence of baseball. You can't simulate a million years of a player's career. You can't put him in a test tube. I think the Players Association would be pretty upset if you were simulating a player for a million years, if that was possible. So it uses history as a guide, and it makes cutting through the fog just a little bit better. Even our best projections are going to have huge error bars, but I do think that the projections are useful to people. I try to work on things that people are interested in, because I mean, baseball is an entertainment product, and anything that helps that, even with a lot of math involved, as long as they don't have to do the math, is generally welcomed by people. And of course, people bet, people play fantasy leagues. There's a lot of ways you can use this stuff. And I try to center ZiPs around kind of an approach where it's useful for people. Because as the old saying is, there's all models are wrong, but some are useful.
See, I got into baseball. I wanted to get into baseball writing because I was told there would be no math, but Dan has brought the math, so that's fine. As long as somebody else does the math.
Yeah, I'm not making anyone do the math. I don't want everyone to do the math because then I have more competitors. Yeah. If I was the only one who did math, I'd be the gatekeeper. I would be the lord of baseball math. So I'm perfectly fine doing the math. That's cool.
Justin, that's why we work, because I was the one who, like, at the age of 10, didn't know there was such a thing as Stratomatic and invented something that was like 70% of the way there to play by myself, involving dice as random number generators, and who would tape all of the statistics from the Sunday Beacon Journal to my wall instead of like pictures of girls or like sports figures. I literally had the stat section on the wall. So
That's the kind of stuff I did too. It was a lot of fun. Although my little baseball sim when I was a kid, I never really quite figured out batter pitcher interaction. I kind of took the approach where it would be the batter's card half the time, the pitcher's card half the time, which a lot of them do. But it wasn't my most involved simulation. My friend Alan always hated playing like action figures with me because I kind of made a system for that for GI Joes.
I did for Ninja Turtles.
Yeah, it's the same thing. It's like I set up like an AD&D type system where you had to roll. You roll for your terrain based on where the GI Joe is. They all had stats and weapon strength and ammo. And he always hated playing GI Joes with me or Transformers because I would try to nerd it up somehow. I couldn't just play the game. I couldn't just play Transformers.
Yeah, I basically brought in a degree of armor class with Ninja Turtles. Like, okay, this guy uses this weapon. What is the likelihood he could actually get through the armor of this character?
Do you still remember your relative stats for the Ninja Turtles?
I feel like part of it was like, I can tell you right now, like Manta Ray was overpowered. And part of the reason for that, to go really nerdy here, was that was like an impossible to track down character for a long time. It was really hard to find. So I ended up making him super powerful to like make that payoff of like looking for like a year and a half to find him worth it. So I do distinctly remember Manta Ray was like, oh, well, he can get you with his tail. He's really fat. I'm like, I don't even know if that guy appeared in an episode I watched, but I made up a good backstory to make that chase of that figure worthwhile. And then you had to make like Mauser's like just repeatable. Like, okay, there's one, but it counts for like 50 type of situation.
Do you remember if you had different stats for Max Baxter as a scientist and Max Baxter as the Fly?
I only had him as a fly. I didn't have him in another form, but I did have, I found the mother load of those recently. So I went through and like I had every variant. So like I have like the sports Ninja Turtles. Maybe someday so I should set up in the background is like Michelangelo playing baseball. I've got that. So those guys were weaker for some reason. I decided since they didn't have like weapons, the sports guys.
Well, yeah, I mean, good. If you have a sharp, I can understand with Michelangelo because he's kind of have like two little mini bats. Like if you took two souvenir bats from the baseball game and chained them together, you're kind of Michelangelo. But you can understand like Leonardo, a baseball bat. I strongly believe is a significant downgrade from a sword, from a katana.
I agree. No,
I mean, if you're fighting someone in an alley in a weird fight, and you have to choose between having a staff or a baseball bat and a katana,
yeah,
you're gonna take the thing with the sharp edge.
No, 100%.
Wouldn't you just give the bat to Raph? I mean, he did kind of go crumpet on Casey Jones, so I mean, he would know how to use that. That was my only ability to contribute to that conversation is how many times I saw that.
Well, I think we warned we would get into the weeds on various things. Yeah, it's no, but like I remember doing all of that. I like my first attempt at a metric that I put together it was an utter failure, was trying to figure out like college to NFL quarterback success, and instead all I found was a reliable way to predict failure instead of success. It was like that's how this works.
That is still useful information of predicting failure. You think of the NFL as kind of an attrition sport.
Yes,
where you're just predicting when people will fail either physically or as players. I have tinkered with football projections, and then they're a nightmare. I actually tinkered a little bit with them when I was at ESPN, but kind of the thing that nobody really liked was that you'd basically realistically, because of injuries, you would never like predict a running back to start more than 12 games in a season going into a season. And people aren't used to seeing that when they do their fantasy leagues. They're used to seeing like all their running backs, 16 starts, 1,350 yards. It's like, that's not the mean projection. Like the mean projection for like leading the league should be like 1,076 or something because that's the injury rate of running backs, which is extremely high. And really any player, I mean, quarterbacks were somewhat safer, but still, I don't know if the NFL's ready for those kinds of projections yet.
Ahead of the curve on that one, I would say. Real quickly, I know we gotta throw it to a break here in a second, but talking about regression to the mean here. I know people are going to ask about Steven Kwan and how ZiPs is down on Kwan a little bit, but you also wrote his projection was pretty good last year. And I think you said most people would have taken the under of what his projection was last year. So I don't know. I don't want to ask you to give away in the secret sauce or how deep you can go, but
I'll give away some secret sauce. Oh, I mean, what it comes down to is you look at the curve of Kwan's projections, and the thing about Kwan is, at least in the projections, the ceiling isn't super high, simply because he doesn't have a lot of power to add, and he plays a corner outfield position. So there's only so high realistically he can go as a corner outfielder. I mean, it's hard to be, a plus 20 defender in left field. It's hard to be a top offensive player in left without a lot of home runs, because the other left fielders are hitting home runs. I wouldn't call it a bad projection by any means. It's projecting him to be a really solid player, but he's still at the place where he's establishing himself. Just how much contact can he maintain, and can he maintain that contact without the high batting averages, with not a crazy batting averages and balls in play. Now, he's better than David Fletcher ever was, so I don't want to necessarily people say he's projected like David Fletcher. But the thing about Fletcher is there was always that risk with Fletcher, because he didn't make hard contact, that if he fell off, he could fall off hard. And that is kind of what happened with Fletcher. I love Kwan. He's kind of a throwback in a way. He's a very non-2020-22 type player. So that makes him a lot of fun. But I don't think that right now he has the background and necessarily the upside yet for ZiPs to say, hey, he's a 4 or 5 win a year player. And I kind of have this argument every year with, 5 or 6 guys. Last year it was Brian Reynolds and Cedric Mullins, because people will always say, okay, well, this time is different. And then you have to say, okay, but why? Why is it not different in this case than it was in a million other cases? Kwan's a really good player, and there's no reason that the Guardians should be worrying about him. It just, generally speaking, you do take a step back when you take a big step forward. And I had a discussion, I forget who it was with, it might have been one of you, or about Jose Ramirez. I think that possibly you guys some people got a little spoiled, because Ramirez's pattern of continual improvement was actually fairly unusual and fairly special. It's hard to improve on a line the way that he did.
Development is never linear, as we know.
No. Yes.
It's messy.
Yes, he's an interesting one. I have to, before we go to break, I have to ask about another rookie on this team, just because I don't think I have taken more hate for a stance than my Oscar Gonzalez is not a sure thing stance. I'm kind of curious. To me, I thought ZiPs at a 100 runs created plus actually liked him. To me, that's a because he feels like a very odd profile, even at the best of times. I can't find a lot of guys that kind of mirror the complete free swingerness, but also I'm trying to remember if his chase rate wasn't bad or something. He had one area.
Oh, it was bad. It was bad. It would have been as bad as Javi Baez if he qualified.
Okay. So the chase rate was bad, but he did something kind of, I don't know, maybe it's just contact rate, but he feels like with the extreme low walk, it almost feels like he makes Javi Baez feel selective at points. I got to ask about Oscar. Is a player like him, is it extreme variance in a system like this when you run that many things, or is it kind of, am I wrong, or is he not that unusual anymore?
Well, the degree of his contact when you get into the Javier Baez territory, even that's pretty unusual, because there are degrees of contact territory. I mean, he wasn't as bad as Javier Baez in a contact way. It was more in an aggression way. And I think the problem with Gonzalez is he doesn't really have a ton of power. So the payoff for the contact isn't necessarily massive. And again, I think that kind of hurts his upside a bit. Steamer actually liked him quite a bit better than ZiPs did. So at least for him, you could take the Steamer side, but then you lose some other players. You can't always pick and choose.
Mm-hmm.
But ZiPs does have some skepticism about him. His comps are all over the place. You have some really good players. I'm looking at him right now, and Roberto Clemente is on his list, number 26. This, of course, compared him to kind of the early days in his career when he was very undisciplined and he was still going as Bobby Clemente at that point. Harry Hyman's on that list, Adam Jones, but there's a lot of guys who did not really pan out. Keith Lambert's at the top, Gordy Coleman.
Ricky Jordan makes sense now that I'm looking at the numbers. I remembered him, so that's why I immediately clicked on him from the listing. But I'm like, oh,
Andy Costco. I'm trying to remember. I actually don't know Andy Costco at all. It's beyond his name. He actually was better than I remembered, but he's going to carry a low on base percentage in all likelihood, except the years he hits 320. And that's hard to maintain in 2022. It's hard to be a 300 hitter every year. So I'm probably going to get charged of blasphemy too. But I definitely see a kind of a fallback, and Zips does to a degree. But again, Steamer is more optimistic about it than I am.
Steamer really likes the Guardians. I was kind of blown away by some of the projections. Even in the Will Brennan was almost a 110 runs created plus. I think it's Steamer over 100. There were some interesting ones there. We should take break number 3. I still haven't asked about Valera, so if you've been waiting for that, I promise that'll come up in segment 3. But first, a quick note from our sponsors. And we are back from that quick note from sponsors. So let's just go with Valera. People, I want to state this so people understand. These are not he's going to be these guys. These are similar profiles that come up through the system, as you talked about. But Valera is one that is fun to look at, just because it's Dwight Evans, Aaron Judge, and then Ken Henderson, who I was not familiar with, but I went and looked up. And you see those 2 names at the top of the list. That's certainly going to make you do a double take.
Yeah, Ken Henderson was actually a pretty solid player for a while. I think what people do need to kind of when they see those names like that take into consideration is, one, the specific names aren't really that important. It's fun to see who's the most comparable, but I can't really just post 700 guys for every projection. I think Meg would be very upset with me if I posted 700 comps for everyone. But it's also important to remember that these aren't comps of what is projected to be his projection in the future. It's players with similar baselines at that point in their careers. Aaron Judge was not a huge prospect, and he was not a finished product at that point in his career. You look back on Dwight Evans, and he was someone who was a much better player in his 30s than he was in his 20s. He kind of got it later. So it doesn't necessarily mean just even having those names that it's necessarily a good thing. And if you go farther down the list, like Valera, there's quite an assortment of players there. You have Cliff Floyd and Ken Singleton and Jay Buhner, a lot of good hitters, but also some guys that you wouldn't, like Craig Kasek, who I don't actually know who that is. I'm actually Googling him right now. Actually, Craig Kasek's an interesting player who I do want to know more about, because he looks a lot like a late 70s Ken Phelps all-star guy. He had a 400 on base percentage in the minors and only got 7 games in the majors. But I don't think that people are that interested in a Pirates minor leaguer from 40 years ago.
I think my other fun one going through was Mikhail Ramirez. I'm not even familiar with, just because I think he had the best name comps, with number 1 being Doc Doyle and number 2 being Red Rambo. I thought, do you still occasionally put fake names in here? I thought for sure Red Rambo was a fake name when I saw that. And then I
haven't put any fake names in this year. I do. Sometimes I'll put in one, for the batter, for the player Dylan Thomas. I put in Other Poets one year. And one of the running jokes is there's no one now left to do it, but I always had Tyler Holt capitalized like Steve Holt from Arrested Development. So there's Tyler Holt, Brock Holt, and Sean Wooten I always had with 2 zeros for his name, because Woot the old leet speak. Very, very Gen X jokey about it. Now, one thing I still do is that people will see certain players show up as comps and draw the wrong conclusion about the player because they forget that more than one player had that name. I had that problem with Bob Gibson's for a while because Bob Gibson, nondescript 80s reliever, showed up on the top 3 comps pretty regularly for pictures. And of course, there was always someone in the comments who would say, Bob Gibson, that doesn't seem right. It's like, no, there was another Bob Gibson. There was another Frank Thomas. There were 2 Jeff Robinsons. And so they all have, I've had to change their names. You have not that Bob Gibson or other Frank Thomas, or I'm not sure which Jeff Robinson this is. Just little jokes. I try to sneak kind of a weird joke into most things I do because baseball is fun and writing about baseball is fun. And I like to have a little fun. For someone who uses a lot of math in baseball writing, I'm not a very serious person. I'm kind of a silly person. I'm not very mature for a 44-year-old.
I enjoyed the other when you released the preview, it just said other nailer and catcher. I'm like, that was pretty. I mean, not like overly humorous like the rest of the ones you're just talking about. But I just
didn't want to put first names on the graphic because I don't usually do that. So I just put just the other nailer, and then I thought, okay, well then over here on DH I'll just put first the original nailer. But then I thought then the people will start getting confused, and so I just left it like that. Like
only both Logan Allens had made the team.
I know.
I actually posted the correct Allen in Twitter, which people can check by the time they listen to this. I actually projected the wrong Logan Allen accidentally. I forgot that I changed this one to Logan T. Allen in my database so that it would call up the right name.
See, I was trying to get people to do Logan Allen the Elder and Logan Allen the Younger, but no one would get behind that with me.
I actually like that. I could adopt that in the future.
Logan Allen, that the one in Cleveland is now Logan Allen the Younger, and then we had Logan Allen the Elder, who is
so some of the name coincidences are always weird in baseball. There were 2 Jeff D'Amicos at the same time, roughly the same quality. And I mean, they weren't related or anything. I mean, a lot of times you see like names repeat in history, but it's because it's father and son. What's always bothered me is that Alan Ashby and Andy Ashby were not related.
I think at points in my head, I assumed they were brothers. Maybe it was just like as a child. I'm like, yeah, aren't they? Wait, because Alan. No, that's not what I'm thinking. I'm thinking of
Bennis.
The Bennis aren't those Alan and Andy as well?
Yeah. There's a
Andy Bennis and Alan Bennis, right? Those were.
I think they were related.
They were brothers. That's what I was thinking. I went to the wrong one instead of Ash. I went to the B's instead of the A's.
Now I tried to convince someone on Usenet in the 90s that just to get them angry with me, I would tell them that Cal Ripken and Bill Ripken aren't related, and he would find like links to articles referring to them as brothers, and I would just say, "Oh no, that was a mistake. People just assume that they're brothers." Just to troll this guy because I didn't know I was going to write in baseball for a living and that I'd have to reflect on trolling people meanly in 25 years ago.
People did that a lot with Justice Sheffield, thinking he was related to Gary Sheffield, and that made its way around the internet for quite a while, but was quickly dispelled. But people tried to make that a thing.
No, I would definitely remember that. I'm trying to remember. There was someone who had a very unusual name that I interviewed who was a college player. I'm like, no, I'm not related to that guy. But I unfortunately have now talked to so many random college players over the years. I've forgotten who that is. I know we wanted to also bother you. We've already taken so much of your time. Nick Enright was one of those names that jumped for us. According to ZiPs, Cleveland made a bit of a mistake not protecting him.
Oh no, ZiPs was into Enright. He struck out 12 batters a game at AA and AAA, and as we've talked about, I don't remember if we talked about it yet, but offense in the minors has exploded the last few years. You have the Pacific Coast League scoring nearly 6 runs a game, Those are levels not seen since the 80s when they still had a park in Denver, and pretty much all the PCL parks were like at high elevations. Offense has blown up in the minors to the same degree that it's disappeared in the majors, to the extent that the minor league translations for some pitchers, their ERAs actually go down when you look at them in the majors, simply because, I mean, generally speaking, you're talking about a 15 to 20% difference in level strength, but the difference in offense between the leagues is that large now. So if you're moving someone from, say, a hitter's park to, say, Seattle or something, you actually expect their ERA to be better than it was in the Pacific Coast League. And that Enright was very successful in the minors is a pretty big deal. He's definitely someone that I would want on my team, and if I was a GM, because the team made a very poor decision to make me a GM, I would definitely be trying to call about him.
Yeah, with the
Marlins did. Well, they call his name in the Rule 5 draft. Yeah, so.
But their bullpen has enough issues that, like, I think we've both been like, well, darn it.
Yeah, they're not going to have a lot of leads to protect because the Marlins offense is really awful.
It's weird.
I was, and then I know I had two other guys relief wise. I wanted to bother you about, one in the minors, one in the majors, and I'll let Justin speak. I know someone's already writing an angry comment.
Someone's always angry at me at all times. It's one of the things I had to kind of learn while I was working for ESPN, because I increased my profile and increased the people who were mad at me. So I'm kind of used to it by now.
Well, as on this podcast, I'm the one who gets I'm the Bayless, I guess. I'm the disliked one here, but it's not that bad. Most people understand that we're very. The first time
I went to visit ESPN, this was in 2011. The first time I had been called into the office. My sister asked me if I was there, if I could punch Skip Bayless. I'm like, yeah, I can't actually do that because they value him more than they value me, and I should not be punching the employees. I was always the guy there who got along with other writers and editors and didn't have any drama. So no, sorry, Meg, no punches.
I gotta ask though. I guess that's the way.
I mean, it was a reasonable thing to ask, but I couldn't do that.
So I thought in your write-up was interesting that just how high ZiPs is on Clase throughout the year. I felt like one could make a case that he's an underrated reliever because the name isn't as big, but just how much, I mean, it seems like the answer is all, but how bought in is ZiPs on Clase is being able to maintain. I mean, he's had an ERA over 1.5 the last 2 years. It seems impossible to keep anything like that going.
Well, let's put it this way. ZiPs has him with the lowest rest of career projected ERA of any pitcher in baseball. Obviously, it's not going to be as valuable as, say, a starting pitcher who's just a little worse at allowing runs. But ZiPs at least thinks that Clase is the best reliever in baseball. And given his age, he's just going to be 25 for 2023, that he has a good shot at being one of the best relievers of this generation. And also it sounds almost French because you'd say something's classé or déclassé.
It is the number of people who say Clase, and I know I can't make fun of anyone's pronunciation, so I'll leave it at that. It's interesting.
Pronunciations are hard because you have things like different players saying the same name differently. Greg Gagne and Eric Gagne, and you have, of course, the various Lows and the Lau of the Rays. I'm still not sure which one Lau is, and if the one that's gone is a Low or a Lau, so I just call them Low because I don't know which one's which. And like Jonathan Scope, his name looks like Shoop. It's names are difficult, and when you have 3,000 players to know in any given year or so, and a lot of them changing every year, it does sometimes get different pronunciations. Broadcasters certainly don't help. I remember during the one playoffs where Anibal Sanchez was Annabelle Sanchez. Like I'm sure he doesn't pronounce his name Annabelle.
That'd be kind of awesome if he did, though.
It would be. And then of course you have Luis Robert, Louis Robert, Lou Bob, which has become his nickname. Names are tricky. I think as long as you're being fair to the player overall, I think generally speaking, as long as you're trying, they're generally forgiving about things.
No, I'd agree with that. The before I give up the mic here again, because this is a rare opportunity. One of our, I think, Just and I's favorite sleepers in the system in terms of relief is Cade Smith, and he had some fun comps. He had some interesting 80th percentile WAR outcomes. I know I'm really asking you about a guy who's way off the map here, but as a kid who was undrafted, I Just and I literally had this discussion, I think yesterday or 2 days ago, about how we both like Smith. So I thought I would take a chance, since you're one of the few people who actually has like projections at that level on a player like that, at least for relative things.
He's like one of those guys where he needs to lose a walk or two a game. That's as simple as that. And a lot of these guys, it never actually happens. But the fact is, if you can get guys to swing and miss, then you have something going for you, and that has potential. The Astros have kind of built a pitching staff based on having pitchers in the low minors who could get batters to swing and miss, and had a lot of other flaws, and fix them all. And every team tries to do that, but the Astros actually did. So you take a guy who has interesting tools, he can get batters to swing and miss. There's always going to be a chance that he's going to figure it out. But if you're not fooling AA batters, if you're striking out 6 guys a game in AA, there's only so much control you're going to have to get over the fact that you're not really fooling batters who are much, much worse than major league batters. So yes, I know it's cliche, but strikeout rate is huge. Mm-hmm. And any pitcher with a good strikeout rate in the minors, I keep promoting them and make them prove that they can't do it, no matter how they're getting guys out. Maybe someone has a wicked changeup and not a great fastball, but they're fooling batters. And on some level, you have to appreciate that and give those players every opportunity to succeed.
Oh, that makes sense.
I'd have to agree. Yeah. This isn't really, well, yes, it is. Okay, so the second one will be stats adjacent. But have you had to do any input changes based on, or have you even considered based on the elimination of the shift? Has that factored in at all?
I would love to do that, but I can't, unfortunately, because even though there's a number of problems with trying to guess this, because I don't like doing things that are just my guesses. When ZiPs does everything's tested, is working. There's extensive cross-validation, and I study these things. And that was very hard, for example, in 2020, trying to project plays for 2021. I did kind of have to make an educated guess, but I talked with people, my exact approach going with that. With shifts, the problem is that shift versus no shift, the data are very, very noisy. It's the same like with platoon splits and even home road data. You need a lot of numbers to make shift versus no shift data to be generally meaningful. So you get a situation where it is for a few guys. The other thing is, I don't think that teams are actually going to go back to a traditional everybody stand out there like it's 1975 configuration. I think they're going to shift as much as they can, having a guy right at second base where he's allowed to be, just right on the edge of the bag on the other side, which you're allowed to do. And we don't really have data for how they hit in that situation. Like, we can look up Joey Gallo versus the shift and versus like standard shift and no shift, but we don't really have Joey Gallo in possible 2023 shift. So the actual relevant data, they don't even exist. We have similar data for similar concepts. So it's an additional leap to going forward. It's just one of those things that is kind of out there in the ether that we can't really model until we have more of an idea of what the consequences are.
Now, see, that's a great answer, because in my mind, I think people overlooked that. I even overlooked it, that people aren't just going to stand where they normally would stand on a baseball diagram. They're still going to be different chess pieces in different places.
Yeah, they're just not going to shift as far as they would like to. And I know people want everything to be in a projection, but I try to project things and use things that make the tool useful to people. If I'm just making stuff up, it's not useful, and just pretending that I know something that I don't, like how the size of the bases will affect things. Will they start to steal as aggressively in the majors as they did in the minors? These kinds of things are pretty much just complete unknowns at this point. And I don't want to use a tool in a way that a tool doesn't work for. I mean, if you're trying to fix a window and all you have is a hammer, the hammer is still not a good idea. I assume I've never actually fixed a window.
Probably not. I mean, you just break it more with the hammer, I would assume. And then
I would kill the glass, but I don't know. Maybe you have to hammer the nails into the frame. I don't know. The window specialists can write in and complain. Hopefully, one of your sponsor isn't a window treatment place.
Never had a window one, as far as I know.
I was going to ask about X stats too. I don't. Do you use any of the X stats in there too? Because one of my things with that is I always find it to be. It's a good way to tell us what didn't happen. I always wonder, is it really a good predictor of what is going to happen? Because we always assume things are going to even out, right? Like that's how I think people want to look at it, but I don't think that's always true. So I don't know, how much do you use X stats at all?
ZiPs has its own version, which I call Z stats. I'll let listeners guess what the Z stands for. That it is predictive. I've outlined it in articles where I've talked about it. I've never done like one treatment where I just talk about it, so it's kind of scattered around. And ZiPs will use that to assist in the baseline. It doesn't just assume the Z stats are correct. It mixes in the Z stats with a player's history of exceeding or falling short of the Z stats, and it kind of regresses it towards a thing. It does the same thing with defense, where ZiPs doesn't purely use FIP the way Fangraphs WAR does. So it's generally a conservative approach to it, but it is useful. For example, the ZiPs version for home run, Z home run, is far more predictive of future picture home run rates than either using actual home run rate or just assuming league average, which is kind of the XFIP approach. It enables us to have a third way and kind of regress pictures in the right direction. I think a good example of that is Corbin Burns back in all the years run together now. 2019 was the year he allowed 17 home runs in 49 innings. And ZiPs gave him a solid projection for the following year. And everyone said, or a lot of people said, but 17 home runs. I'm like, yeah, but what? Home runs are very volatile. ZiPs only thought that he should have allowed 8 home runs based on his hit data that year. And so given his short history, ZiPs assumed that was closer, and it was right in that case. Some things it has a smaller weighting because it's not quite as predictive, but it's just ZiPs uses its Z stats to kind of just get that baseline into the best predictive where it should be before you start comparing it to other players.
And Jeff, I was just going to ask real quick, because we've already gone longer than we normally would be told to go, but I want to close it on too. Yes, it's okay, and it's a good guess. So I know just in general, everyone's going to look at Josh Bell. I also see that ZiPs has Mike Zunino not playing as many games.
It's not like Josh Bell at all.
Yeah,
saw the drop off of that exit velocity, and the fact that he's not really he's kind of a ground ball hitter, and is just not really impressed with him. That's another place where you would prefer Steamer to ZiPs for sure.
Mm-hmm.
The ZiPs did like Zunino. Like that's, relative, but I feel like if he can approach a 100 OPS plus, that's
people have to decide which set they'll take.
Yeah.
You can't keep Zunino for. You have to pick like the one slate or the other slate. You can't just if you don't like ZiPs, that's fine, but then you don't get the Zunino projection, and you don't get the Tristan McKenzie projection, which ZiPs likes him a lot more than Steamer does. Generally speaking, ZiPs and Steamer are fairly close on most players, but the ones where they kind of separate are always the most interesting to look at later.
Have you? I doubt you have yet, because there's still a lot of offseason to go. But the absurdly preliminary projected standings had Cleveland 82 and 80, winning the Central by a game. Now, obviously, that's before they signed Josh Bell, even though, ZiPs doesn't really love Josh Bell. They haven't done anything, but obviously, I think at that point you are also projecting Carlos Correa to be somewhere else. Do you have any thoughts on how that might change as we get closer to the end of the offseason?
The last time I ran it, Cleveland had actually gone up considerably. Even though Bell doesn't have a great projection, ZiPs projects Bell better than the likely replacements would have been. And it's the same with catcher. The catcher projection has improved considerably, simply because ZiPs like Zunino. And some of the playing time assumptions had kind of changed in a good Cleveland direction. So last I checked, it had Cleveland up around 87, 88 wins, which of course is preferable.
Yes.
Right now, ZiPs projects Cleveland to be the favorite, but not an overwhelming favorite to win the division. The fact is, the White Sox did add Andrew Benintendi, which is a good pickup for them, but it's a very unambitious team that it kind of feels like their window is closing quicker than either the Twins or the Guardians. Because the Guardians have much better reinforcements than the White Sox do.
Yeah, the White Sox, we've talked about on this show, will be nice. Yeah, it feels a little tapped out with both prospects and maybe spending in spite of their market.
Yeah,
I know my friends who are White Sox fans are always kind of appalled at the mid-market play of that management and maybe
I was surprised
ownership group.
I was surprised they even signed Benintendi, truthfully.
I actually was mildly surprised too. I think the problem is they were kind of mismanaged of how high they would go. The fact is, if you're a contender and you're going to spend 180 million, don't plan on spending 180 million if you're not later planning to spend 210 million or something, because you get your cheapest seasons earliest in your contending cycle. If you're a team that's on kind of a cycle, it gets more expensive to keep competing as you get on, because the reasons that you are a good team was a lot of cost controlled players, and they likely became a lot less cost controlled. So you have to have kind of those reinforcements. There's a disputed anecdote from the invasion of France in World War II that allegedly Churchill asked the French marshal, I forget which one was still the commander at the time, where the reinforcements were, and that his answer was, there aren't any. And that's kind of where the White Sox are. They're in a position where they need reinforcements, either in system or financially, and there are none. There's no tactical reserve in retreat. Any army which doesn't have a reserve is kind of going to be in trouble. And last year for the White Sox, where a lot of things went wrong and they didn't have that reserve, it was a little like the Ardennes Forest, the Germans coming through. I got to be careful before I make Nazi references on a baseball show, because that's a weird thing to do, but it's kind of the position that the White Sox are in. The French army.
When you're adding Victor Reyes and Billy Hamilton already on minor league contracts, I think that speaks to your own concerns with your depth.
Yeah, if you're adding players and people are surprised that they're still in baseball, it's like, oh wait, that's right, Billy Hamilton's still in baseball. That's not a good idea. I mean, the Giants and Carlos Correa, everyone knows that he's in baseball. Yeah. Billy Hamilton, you're like, oh, wait, was he a pinch runner for someone last year? And that's not a great sign.
Even like I'm not saying Victor Reyes is a great player. He got quite a few at bats last year, and for a player like him to be like, oh yeah, I'll take a minor league contract right now, feels to me that that's like, as a player, being willing to accept a minor league contract before Christmas when you played in 96 games a year ago speaks to like him viewing a very easy pathway to potentially getting time in the majors, that's not going to stay minor league.
I mean, put it this way. He was a player that wasn't good enough for the Tigers to retain. And if anyone who saw that offense last year, if you don't make that offense, that's not a great sign for your future.
I feel like his 85 runs created plus had to have been top 10 on the team, right? Like that for that team. I mean, that's above their average.
Yeah,
second to Eric Haas, I'm sure.
I mean, they didn't have a single starter with an OPS plus of 100, which is pretty bleak. I mean, Torkelson was terrible. Scope was terrible. I mean, everyone was terrible.
It was Haas was the only bright spot as a hitter. I feel like.
I mean, I half joked that signing Michael Lorenzen was going to be their second best hitter. It was a half joke, but maybe it's not.
Yeah, I'm not sure if they signed a pitcher, he wouldn't be their second best hitter. Madison Bumgarner might be their second best hitter if they traded for him. Obviously, that's a bit of hyperbole. But I mean, Miguel Cabrera was terrible, but nobody kind of noticed he was terrible because he wasn't so much more terrible than the rest of the team. The Tigers are not a danger to the Guardians this year in all likelihood. Just to keep this on topic.
I don't see it. Yeah.
No, it's a weird division. I think we can just go ahead and say it is a very weird division. And as Guardians fans, we may be a little bit lucky right now with some of the track record of teams and development and the like. But at least the Tigers, I'll give them credit. They're doing some new things. They hired the pitching coach, some from Iowa, doing some new thoughts. So I'll be curious to see what they do. They're trying some ways to fix it. But we are at almost an hour, Dan. You've given us so much of your time. We appreciate having you on and letting us talk about very random things as well as talk about this Guardians team. I know ZiPs is always one of those things that I very much look forward to seeing. It's always something that ends up being multiple shows and then talking about when the prospect list come out as well. And it's kind of a off-season gift that keeps on giving if you're a fan of baseball or if you're someone like us doing a show. It's a fun wealth of information. So thank you for the time and just for continuing to put out a system that is entertaining and informative.
Well, thanks for having me on, guys. I'm always enjoying talking shop.
Yes, that was fun.
No, this was great. I want to thank everyone for listening, rating and reviewing, downloading. It helps. YouTube count. I know I should already be in there letting people know we had another little jump. So I want to thank everyone who has joined us in the past few days. We're getting close to 1,300 followers on the YouTube. So thank you all. Or no, I'm sorry, 1,135. I dyslexic. I transpose things. So we're getting close to 1,200. So thank you all. I think that's about it. We are technically in the off season, so may not be 5 days a week. We are figuring that out. We will let you know. And we'll end it the way we always do. Go Guardians, go.